In a future not far from now, the Earth goes still. A signal pierces the stars, calculated, deliberate, not of this world. It doesn't ask, it doesn't plead, it gives a choice: change or be erased. As panic consumes nations and the sky watches in silence, one truth becomes clear. Humanity is no longer alone. From the shadows of the moon, a black monolith appears, silent, watching. Above Saturn, they wait, ancient, unknowable. The Axiari have returned, but they're not here to invade. They're here to judge. Now divided governments must unite, old enemies must reconcile, and one woman, Dr. Aria Velasquez, must decode the message that could save the world. Alongside a former soldier who once believed in war, she'll lead the final effort to answer the most terrifying question of all: are we worth saving? As the countdown begins, storms rise, truths unravel, and the soul of civilization is laid bare. Billions must make a choice, not to survive, but to evolve. In the final hours, with extinction on the line, humanity doesn't just face an ultimatum, it faces itself. This summer, witness the moment the world stood still, the day we were tested, and the night we chose life. Interstellar Ultimatum, humanity's bold choice. Coming soon. The stars are watching. It began with a whisper from the stars, an anomaly so faint, so distant, it might have been brushed off as background noise in the eternal hum of the cosmos. But this signal was no coincidence. On an ordinary Tuesday in the year 2083, just before dawn crept across the Californian desert, the world changed forever. The SETI research base in San Rafael, silent for years save for the occasional false alarm, lit up with data bursts so dense, so alien in nature, that even the most jaded technicians stood frozen, coffee mugs trembling in their hands. The message was short, encrypted beyond Earth's comprehension, but its tone was unmistakably deliberate. Someone, or something, was trying to talk to us. Within hours, the signal was confirmed by space observatories in China, India, the EU Lunar Base, and the Mars Terraforming Initiative. No one knew where it originated, only that it was directed precisely toward Earth and carried a mathematical rhythm that reeked of intelligence. It wasn't until AI linguistics protocols finally cracked a segment of the repeating code that the true nature of the message began to unfold. The transmission, projected in over 3,000 languages through quantum waveform, contained a chilling ultimatum. The translation was blunt. Humanity has reached the tipping point. You have 365 Earth days to change course or be erased. You are not alone. We are the Axiari. Panic didn't set in immediately. At first, there was disbelief. Every major government, scientific organization, and media outlet scrambled to analyze and verify the message. Was it a prank? A cyber hoax? A rogue experiment from some undisclosed tech billionaire? But as more fragments of the message unraveled and strange gravitational disturbances were detected in orbit around Jupiter, the doubt vanished. Something out there was watching. And it had been watching for a very long time. The President of the United States called for an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council, the first in nearly 20 years. For once, every delegate showed up. Even rogue states who hadn't spoken in decades took their seats, hushed and pale. As the recording of the Axiari signal played, its tones not entirely mechanical, not entirely organic, an eerie silence filled the chamber. There were no demands, no negotiations, just a countdown and a warning: change or be reset. The term reset ignited debate across every platform on the planet. Was it metaphorical, spiritual, or literal annihilation? Conspiracy theorists claimed it was a globalist mind control tactic. Scientists urged calm but secretly ran simulations on planetary extinction scenarios. Religious leaders split. Some preached hope and divine deliverance. Others declared it was the judgment day foretold. In the streets, people marched. In the skies, satellites shifted their trajectories, trying to trace the origin. But it was all in vain. The Axiari, whoever they were, had outmaneuvered every signal interceptor, every astrophysical theory. They weren't just more advanced. They were operating on a level Earth couldn't begin to grasp. Then came the moon event. At precisely midnight GMT, 22 days after the signal's arrival, the world's telescopes caught it. A monolithic structure, the size of Manhattan, slowly descending into lunar orbit. Black as obsidian, smooth as glass, it radiated no heat, no energy signature. But it hovered, perfectly motionless, just above the surface of Earth's moon. No engine, No explanation, just presence. From orbit, satellites picked up a faint pulse, one that mirrored the ticking countdown embedded in the original signal. The obelisk was a clock, humanity's clock, and now the countdown was real. While nations squabbled and military leaders debated retaliation, a silent revolution brewed within the scientific community. Hidden beneath the Swiss Alps, within an ultra-secure facility buried beneath CERN, a task force was formed, Project Reconciliation. Made up of the world's top minds, physicists, biologists, anthropologists, and cryptographers, they were charged with one impossible goal: find out what the Axiari wanted and find a way to meet their expectations, or fake it well enough to buy more time. Among these minds was Dr. Aria Velasquez, a 35-year-old linguistic prodigy fluent in over 20 languages, raised by diplomats and considered by many to be the one person who might understand the Axiari's true intent. Aria wasn't just a genius, she had a gut instinct for patterns, emotions hidden in symbols, meaning buried in math. And when she stared at the code, she didn't just see data, she saw judgment. She saw a mirror. The Axiari, she realized, weren't interested in our politics, our economy, or even our survival. They were interested in our trajectory. The message outlined core criteria for acceptable civilizations: energy sustainability, ethical governance, unity in diversity, emotional intelligence. It wasn't about progress, it was about harmony. Humanity, in its current state, was failing on every front. The more the project decoded, the more the truth settled in. The Axiari were not invaders, they were auditors, cosmic curators of civilizations, guardians of galactic balance, and Earth, with its nuclear tensions, climate collapse, digital addictions, and deep-rooted tribalism, had been red-flagged. In an emergency broadcast, the president spoke directly to the planet. "We have been given a warning, not from an enemy but from a witness. A civilization far older than ours has challenged us to be better, to grow or to go. This is not just a moment in history, this is the moment. We stand at the edge of the abyss, and we must choose whether to evolve or vanish." Overnight, Earth changed. Stock markets crashed, border walls fell, families fled cities, some began building underground bunkers, others sold their possessions and took pilgrimages to sacred sites. The northern lights began behaving strangely, pulsing to a rhythm that matched the lunar obelisk signal. The Axiari were watching, waiting, measuring. But as fear gripped the world, so too did a strange sense of wonder. What if this was the chance? What if, for the first time in history, humanity could unite, not through war but through necessity, not for conquest but for redemption? Aria Velasquez believed it was possible. Deep in her bones, she believed the Axiari weren't here to destroy humanity. They were here to test it, to awaken it, to ask the most important question in all of existence: if given the choice, will humanity rise or fall? The days that followed were a blur of conflicting emotions, as if the planet itself had forgotten how to breathe. Streets once alive with the ordinary rhythm of human life now pulsed with tension. Markets collapsed under the weight of uncertainty. Schools shut down indefinitely. World leaders held televised conferences filled with empty reassurances and forced smiles, while behind closed doors panic metastasized like cancer. No nation wanted to be the first to admit it, but all of them knew it. Humanity wasn't ready, not even close. If the Axiari were serious, if the ultimatum was real, then the odds of survival were vanishing by the hour. The first cracks began to show at the geopolitical level. The United Nations Emergency Council, which had once been the closest thing to global unity, became a circus of paranoia. Russia and China accused the West of fabricating the Axiari message as a smokescreen for digital hegemony. The US and EU countered by claiming Eastern powers were planning a preemptive strike against the lunar obelisk. In the Middle East, leaders alternated between calls for holy war and prayers for divine redemption. African coalitions demanded to know why they should suffer for the mistakes of the industrialized world. And while the rest of the planet teetered between fear and fury, the billionaires disappeared. Not all of them, but enough to make the world notice. Private jets vanished into the Arctic, into the Andes, into underground cities whispered about in conspiracy forums for decades. Elon Musk's Mars colony suddenly went dark. A classified AI leak revealed that several tech giants had been working on an emergency planetary migration initiative, codenamed Phoenix Protocol, that prioritized the ultra-wealthy, the hyper-intelligent, and the politically connected. The outrage was swift, but so was the realization. When the sky starts falling, those who built the ladders get to climb them first. Yet even in this chaos, the human spirit didn't entirely crumble. In a small laboratory buried deep beneath the Alps, Project Reconciliation continued its work. Led now unofficially by Dr. Aria Velasquez, whose clarity of thought and emotional steadiness earned her respect even from military brass, the team pushed past exhaustion, decoding layer after layer of Axiari code. What they discovered wasn't a command or a threat in the traditional sense. It was a map, a cosmic metric system by which the Axiari judged civilizations. Aria called it the Harmony Scale. It ranked civilizations not by wealth or power, but by sustainability, moral coherence, compassion, and capacity for change. According to the data, Earth's current score placed it just above primitive combustion civilizations and slightly below internally parasitic societies. It was a damning place to be. The key, Aria believed, wasn't about showing change, it was about being change. The Axiari could detect falsehood. Their technology, far beyond even our most advanced AI, could observe emotion, intention, patterns of energy flow between populations. They didn't need cameras. They felt us. And they were feeling fear, deception, selfishness. We were failing their test, not because we didn't want to survive, but because we didn't understand what survival meant to a species like them. Then, in the middle of a windless night, as if cued by some unseen hand, the obelisk pulsed. Once, bright enough to cast a new moonlight across half the earth, and then a voice, not in our ears but in our minds, all minds, simultaneously. No translation required, no decoding necessary. The voice was both singular and collective, masculine and feminine, cold yet mournful. It said only this: intent is insufficient, action must be irreversible. Then silence. The phrase was replayed in every language across every screen, dissected by pundits, worshipped by mystics, feared by generals. What did it mean? That empty promises and political theatre would no longer do. That humanity had to commit to change so permanently it couldn't return to its old ways? How could such irreversible transformation happen in less than a year, when even simple laws took decades to pass? Commander Elias Grant, a decorated ex-military officer turned strategist for Project Reconciliation, offered the first tangible solution. What if we stop thinking like separate nations, he said during a classified session. What if we present ourselves as one species, one planet, one voice? It's radical, yes, maybe impossible. But that's exactly what the Axiari want to see, capacity for unity in the face of extinction. His idea, crazy just days before, began to take root. Within 72 hours, an unprecedented summit was held in Geneva. Not everyone came. Some leaders refused, some sent proxies, some sent assassins. But enough came to matter. For the first time in human history, delegates from opposing ideologies, blood-soaked borders, and centuries of conflict sat down with one question. How do we prove to the stars that we deserve to survive? Aria presented her findings. They don't want our money. They don't want our weapons. They don't want our worship. They want our evolution. Social, emotional, civilizational. The Axiari are not threatening to destroy us. They're offering us a mirror. And right now, what we see isn't beautiful. It's fractured, angry, suicidal. But they're giving us a choice. That means they believe in us more than we believe in ourselves. Some applauded, some scoffed. But even those who mocked her knew deep down she was right. The time for pride was over. The countdown was ticking, and the Axiari weren't watching for miracles. They were watching for decisions. The world outside didn't change overnight. But seeds were planted, borders relaxed, truces were signed. Several countries forgave old debts. Social media platforms voluntarily shut down for 72 hours to reduce digital toxicity. Churches, mosques, temples, and synagogues opened their doors not just to their own, but to everyone. For the first time in history, Earth Day wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was treated like a planetary emergency drill. Millions turned off their lights, factories paused, highways emptied. For a few hours, Earth held its breath, and the obelisk pulsed again. This time it was faint, gentle, like a heartbeat. And just for a moment, the tides on every ocean stilled. Birds stopped mid-flight. Children reported hearing a hum in the air that made them cry and smile at the same time. Something was shifting. Whether it was external or within us, no one could say. But one thing was certain. The test had begun. They landed on the moon in silence, the way ghosts might approach a graveyard they were once buried in. There were no grand speeches, no flags being planted, only a dozen human beings in reinforced pressure suits staring up at the towering black obelisk that cast a shadow longer than memory itself. The structure didn't hum, didn't blink, didn't move. It simply existed, a thing beyond age or gravity. It looked as if it had been there long before the moon was born and had only just chosen to be seen. The task force sent to investigate, scientists, engineers, and one former Marine, stood at the base of it like ants trying to read a tombstone carved by gods. Commander Elias Grant, suited up and silent, was the first to step forward. There were no access panels, no seams or markings, only smooth obsidian that shimmered like liquid metal under artificial light. He pressed a sensor wand against the surface, and the wand short-circuited instantly. The obelisk didn't reject the contact, it simply ended it, as if it had decided, in the blink of a thought, that this technology was beneath response. Dr. Aria Velasquez watched from the command center back on Earth, her heart racing as real-time data streamed in through the crew's visors. The obelisk wasn't just some artifact, it was a node, a listening post, and it wasn't alone. In orbit around Saturn, new scans revealed massive Axiari vessels hidden behind electromagnetic cloaks. They were colossal, unlike any spacecraft human eyes had ever conceived, organic in structure with forms that bent light and seemed to exist half in our dimension and half in another. They made no approach, no contact, no threats. They simply waited, suspended in the void, watching as if the outcome of this test was already known. Their presence destroyed any illusion of human dominance. Earth's fleets, nuclear arsenals, and space stations were ants flicking pebbles at titans. Back on the moon, Elias and his team noticed the strangest phenomenon. The surface of the obelisk began to mirror their own thoughts, or at least reflect them back in impossible ways. One crew member recalled a vivid childhood memory and saw a constellation on the obelisk that resembled the night sky from that exact moment. Another swore she heard a long-dead parent whisper her name through the static in her helmet. It wasn't illusion, it wasn't magic, it was communication. The Axiari weren't using words, they were using resonance, echoes of human consciousness to measure depth of being. The deeper they dug, both physically around the obelisk and emotionally into the signal readings, the more it became clear. The Axiari had been here before, thousands of years ago. Carvings found in ancient Sumerian ruins matched the proportions of the obelisk exactly. Pyramids aligned with star maps that now pointed directly to the Axiari vessels. Even in remote tribal cave art in Papua New Guinea, figures with elongated heads and halos of light had been depicted handing down gifts from the stars. We had met them. We had forgotten. Or perhaps we had been made to forget. Dr. Velasquez pored over archaeological records, combining them with fresh scans from the lunar site. The pieces fell into place like a puzzle only the stars could see. The Axiari were not strangers. They were custodians. They were the ones who seeded order in chaos, giving primitive species the tools to evolve, then stepping back to watch, to judge. Humanity had been given gifts, language, math, intuition. Some of them may not have even originated here, but we'd used them poorly. We had poisoned our oceans, filled the sky with satellites, and drawn lines in the dirt that cost millions of lives. To the Axiari, Earth was not a failed experiment yet, but it was on the edge. Then, something happened that wasn't in any equation. On the 6th night of the moon mission, one of the engineers, Dr. Henrik Jarl, a reclusive Swede with a history of mental health issues, broke protocol. He bypassed security measures, activated an experimental fusion drill, and aimed it directly at the base of the obelisk. "They're not gods," he screamed into the comms. "We have to break their test. We have to show we're not afraid to fight." The drill began to spin. In the command center, alarms blared. On the moon, Elias tackled Jarl, trying to wrest the drill away, but it was too late. The beam struck the obelisk. And then stillness. Not an explosion. Not an energy pulse. Just a cold, sharp silence that pierced every open frequency on Earth. All systems, satellites, and even military networks were frozen. Planes grounded mid-air. Global communications crashed in synchrony. The entire planet entered a forced digital coma, and the obelisk, quietly, shifted. For the first time since its appearance, it moved, not violently, not menacingly. It rotated exactly 30 degrees on its axis, and then stopped, as if to say, "We noticed." Arya, heart-pounding, whispered, "What have we done?" The blackout lasted 6 minutes, long enough to terrify 7 billion souls, long enough to remind them that their technology, their bravado, their illusions of control were meaningless to the Axiari. When systems rebooted, a new message appeared, burned into every screen, every smart device, every wall-sized terminal on Earth. It was written in pure binary. Translated, it read, "Intent observed, judgment continues." No retaliation came. The obelisk didn't retaliate because retaliation wasn't the point. It was never about aggression. It was about choice. Jarl's attempt to attack wasn't seen as war. It was seen as a symptom, a diagnostic result, just another data point in the Axiari's evaluation. How far would humanity go to resist change? How quickly would it resort to fear and violence, even when faced with extinction? Later, when questioned, Jarl simply muttered, "I just wanted to prove we mattered." In a way, he had, but not the way he hoped. In the days that followed, Project Reconciliation entered a new phase. The obelisk had made it clear it would not be broken, it would not be bribed, it would not be convinced by anything less than absolute transformation. A global survey showed that over half the planet still believed the message was a test, but the other half believed the end was inevitable. And yet, deep in the quiet moments of reflection, in the stillness after fear, people began asking themselves different questions. Not about how to survive, but how to deserve to. The countdown had passed the halfway point. 176 days remained, and a silence deeper than outer space had settled over the planet. Not the absence of sound, but a silence of certainty, the kind that came when the question was no longer if, but when. Governments stopped pretending. Economies stopped recovering. The illusion of business as usual faded like vapor in sunlight. Everyone everywhere knew the clock was ticking. Even the children felt it. They whispered it into their drawings. They sang it in their sleep. People stopped asking what the Axiari were. They started asking what they had become. All across Earth, two movements emerged, like twin rivers carving through the desert. One called for reform, rebirth, unity. The other called for denial, defiance, war. The first found its champions in voices like Commander Elias Grant, who launched the One World, One Chance initiative, a planetary broadcast of truth stripped of politics. He stood not as a soldier, not even as a leader, but as a man who had killed for his country and now begged for his species. "This is not about surrender," he said in a speech that reached over 6 billion screens. "It's about becoming more than we've ever been. It's about being worth saving." His words lit a flame in places long frozen. Farmers in rural India joined with Silicon Valley coders to create sustainable food AI. Tribal elders in the Congo sat with neuroscientists to map cultural empathy. Prisoners volunteered for labor programs that restored forests. And all of it, every project, every honest step forward, was uploaded to the Axiari observation net via lunar relay. But the second movement spread like fire through dry grass. Some called it the final sovereignty. Others just called it the last stand. It was rooted in the belief that submission to the Axiari, no matter the form, was treason against the human soul. Its leaders were former generals, extremist pastors, fringe scientists, and collapsing regimes desperate to maintain control. They built bunkers in the Andes, launched propaganda networks through pirate satellites, and planned the impossible, a full-scale offensive against the Axiari ships now observed beyond Saturn. They had studied the Black Obelisk and believed they could replicate its energy patterns. Their plan wasn't to win. It was to scream as loud as possible into the face of God, so that if Earth died, it would die shouting. Project Reconciliation was caught between both tides. The core team remained committed, but fractures were forming. Some argued that Earth's transformation needed to be visible, fast, undeniable. Others warned that speed without sincerity would only doom the species faster. Aria Velasquez had stopped sleeping. Her eyes, once filled with quiet brilliance, now burned with something more desperate. Not fear, not fatigue, something raw, something like grief. She understood now that the Axiari weren't watching for infrastructure or innovation or even peace. They were watching for character. Then came the storms. Without warning, Earth's weather systems began behaving erratically. Superstorms spiraled across the Atlantic, snow fell in the Sahara, a tidal wave swallowed half of a Pacific island chain during a cloudless day. But it wasn't natural. Satellites revealed a subtle pattern beneath the chaos. The storms mirrored human activity. Each time a nation made progress, decommissioning weapons, switching to green energy, granting amnesty to political prisoners, the sky cleared above it. Each time a country violated the principles outlined in the Axiari Code, lightning storms struck their power grids, data centers, or crops. It was climate not as consequence, but as communication. The Axiari were now responding in real time. People began to listen. They turned off screens. They left cities. They cleaned rivers and planted trees, not as protests, but as prayers. Children started meditation programs in schools. Former gang members taught community defense courses in war zones, not to fight but to protect. Old enemies met at borders and wept without words. A subtle global pulse began to rise. It wasn't unity, not yet, but it was rhythm, like a wounded heart trying to find its beat again. And then came the betrayal. A covert Black Ops division operating without national approval initiated what came to be known as Operation Dustfall. They had located the energy signatures of 4 Axiari vessels near Saturn and developed a stealth propulsion system to launch 5 unmanned warheads into orbit with quantum-fused EMPs. They claimed it was a contingency plan, a message that Earth wouldn't die quietly. But one of the engineers, Tama Ryoko, a Japanese-American quantum specialist, leaked the plan moments before the launch. Her voice trembled as she recorded a message on the public grid. "They're going to do it. They're going to start a war we can't survive. And if this species has any soul left, someone has to stop them." Her message went viral in seconds. Hundreds of drones scrambled from nearby naval bases. 3 of the 5 warheads were intercepted. 2 slipped through. No one knew what would happen if they reached the Axiari fleet. No one knew if the Axiari would retaliate with fire or simply vanish. Everyone watched and waited. The 2 warheads never made contact. They vanished, not exploded, not deflected, just blinked out of existence as if they had been plucked from the fabric of time itself. And then came the voice again, across every language, every soul. "We have seen your extremes. Now show us your essence." It was the first time the Axiari had acknowledged the division within humanity, and it was the last warning. Project Reconciliation released the Essence Report, an open-source global data feed documenting every act of unity, sacrifice, innovation, and compassion on the planet. People were encouraged not just to act, but to witness, to see each other, to document their transformations, not to earn salvation, but to become worthy of it. The site received 300 million uploads in 48 hours. Images of former enemies embracing, videos of children saving animals, elderly women teaching prisoners how to paint, songs recorded by survivors of genocide, sung in harmony with the descendants of their oppressors. The Axiari saw it all. The obelisk pulsed, then again, then nothing. Elias stood on a cliffside overlooking the Atlantic, the sky painted with twilight. He didn't know what would happen next. Maybe Earth would be spared, maybe it would be erased in a breath. But he finally understood what Arya had meant when she whispered, "It's not about being saved. It's about remembering who we were always meant to be." For the first time in human history, people stopped waiting for a miracle. They started becoming one. The final 24 hours arrived without warning. No alarm, no cosmic trumpet, just the quiet certainty that this was it. Across every time zone, people felt it. Not like panic, but like the hush before something sacred. No official statement came from the Axiari, no new sign in the sky, but everyone knew the clock had struck its final arc. The black obelisk on the moon remained still, looming like a cosmic sentinel, its surface dark and flawless. Yet it felt heavier now, not in mass but in presence, as if it had absorbed everything, every act, every prayer, every betrayal, and was waiting to render its verdict. The world held its breath. In the minutes before midnight GMT, humanity stopped. There were no gunshots, no sirens, no speeches, just stillness. From the neon buzz of Tokyo to the hushed plains of Kenya, from the crumbling ruins of war zones to the glittering towers of cities that never slept, everything paused. Traffic lights blinked on empty intersections, church bells chimed to no procession. Old men hugged their grandchildren tighter, and young lovers kissed like the moment might vanish. Across the globe, eyes turned upward, not in fear, but in reverence. The sky, endless and black, stared back. At the Geneva Harmony Hub, now the de facto nerve center of global coordination, Aria Velasquez stood at the edge of the observation deck, her hands trembling slightly as she watched the timer on the holographic display count down. 1 minute, 59 seconds. She had given everything. Her mind, her body, her hope, to a future she couldn't guarantee. Next to her, Elias stood in silent solidarity, arms crossed, expression carved from stone. The former warrior, once a symbol of humanity's aggression, had become its quiet guardian. They said nothing to each other, there were no words left, only breath and time. And then, the pulse. The obelisk flashed, brighter than the sun, but it didn't burn. It radiated through space, through matter, through soul. The light didn't blind, it revealed. Every human being on Earth, regardless of location, felt it. A moment of stillness followed by a tidal wave of something indescribable. Memory, vision, feeling. They saw themselves, not just as individuals, but as a collective species. Every war, every invention, every child born, every tear shed, they felt the weight of what they were and the ache of what they could be. Then the sky tore open. Not literally, but perceptually. Above the Earth, near the moon, the Axiari revealed themselves. No longer just cloaked ships behind Saturn. No longer distant monitors. They appeared in full, a fleet unlike anything that had ever been imagined. They were not ships in the conventional sense. They were forms of light and sound, structures that shifted with thought, beings that hovered between geometry and emotion. They were beautiful, terrifying, holy. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, the world fell silent again, this time in awe. The Axiari did not speak in words, they spoke in knowing. The message was clear. This was the final review. A moment passed, and in that breathless stretch, humanity stood naked before its cosmic judges. What they saw in us could not be hidden behind statistics or speeches. The Axiari saw cruelty, but they also saw kindness. They saw war, but they also saw resistance to it. They saw ignorance, but they saw wonder too. They saw a species not yet complete, not yet wise, but capable of becoming both. And then came the choice, not from them, from us. A single transmission blinked into existence across every screen, every mind. 6 words, simple and ancient. Do you wish to evolve now? No coercion, no threat, no manipulation, only choice. The answer would not come from a single government, not a president or council. It came from everywhere at once. It came in the form of billions of intentions aligning, of fear dissolving into resolve. The Earth as a whole replied yes. The moment the word was spoken, across lips and minds and hearts, the obelisk shattered. Not in destruction, but in transformation. It fragmented into light, and that light cascaded down across the Earth in silent ribbons of gold, weaving through cities and forests and oceans. And where it touched, change began. Not magic, not miracles, but acceleration, regeneration, possibility. Diseased crops began to self-heal through microcellular reprogramming. Polluted rivers began to restore themselves, aided by a swarm of nanobacterial life seeded subtly by the Axiari weeks prior. Data networks realigned, decentralizing into public open systems where knowledge flowed freely, no longer owned or weaponized. Weapons simply ceased to function. Fossil fuels broke down into inert materials. Satellites blinked into higher orbits, now shielded with materials unknown to our periodic table. But the real change, the one that mattered, occurred within. People began to feel each other, not telepathically, not psychically, but empathetically. A faint echo of connection, a glimpse into the inner state of others. Not enough to read minds, but enough to feel intent, enough to break cycles of violence born from misunderstanding. Hate didn't vanish, but it became harder to justify. Greed didn't evaporate, but it became hollow. Slowly, subtly, the architecture of society began to bend towards something else. Not utopia, but understanding. The Axiari ships slowly receded, pulling back like a tide that had brought with it the seeds of new life. Their final transmission hovered in the atmosphere like a whisper etched into the wind. You have chosen life. We will return in 1,000 of your years, continue, become, remember. And then they were gone. The stars returned to their natural places. The moon hung once again, silent and ordinary. The sky grew still, and Earth, battered, humbled but alive, began its new chapter. In the aftermath, there were no parades, no holidays declared, no monuments erected. The work was not finished. It had only just begun. But something deep had shifted. For the first time in millennia, humanity felt like a single story, not a collection of broken chapters. There were still challenges, still mistakes, but now there was context. Now there was accountability. Now there was hope. Elias retired quietly, spending his days helping rebuild coastal towns erased by earlier storms. Arya became a global mentor, not a leader, guiding young minds toward a future she had once only dreamed of. The word Axiari was no longer spoken with fear, but with reverence, not worship, not dependence, gratitude. The black obelisk never returned. But in every classroom, in every council, in every heart, its memory remained, not as a warning, but as a promise, that when humanity was finally asked to choose, it chose boldness, it chose evolution, it chose life.